Hello everyone, it's Pelicandude, and welcome back to episode 4 of Kerbal Space Program. But before we begin, let's tune in to a live broadcast by President J.F. Kerman.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too. It is for these reasons that I regard the decision last year to shift our efforts in space from low to high gear as among the most important decisions that will be made during my incumbency in the office of the presidency. For we have given this program a high national priority, even though I realize that this is, in some measure, an act of faith and vision. For we do not now know what benefits await us. But if I were to say, my fellow citizens, that we shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away from the control station in Houston, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, the length of this football field, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, capable of standing heat and stresses several times more than have ever been experienced, fitted together with a precision better than the finest watch, carrying all the equipment needed for propulsion, guidance, control, communications, food, and survival on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth, re-entering the atmosphere at speeds of over 25,000 miles per hour, causing heat about half that on the temperature of the sun, almost as hot as it is here today, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first before this decade is out, then we must be bold. Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it. And the moon and the planets are there, and new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked. Thank you.
All right, so there we go. We have our mission laid out before us. Our purpose is clear. We have elected to go to the moon. So, first things first, we must, of course, build a spacecraft that is capable of orbiting the moon. You know, because obviously we wouldn't just want to send up people on a straight-up lunar landing first try. I mean, we've never even been there before. It would be very dangerous. There'd be all sorts of complications involved that we wouldn't even be aware of. So, you know, we really do want to be sending some sort of crew to investigate the area around the moon, to orbit the moon, to find out, you know, just what happens to a Kerman's body when they've spent so much time in space, and all the other pieces of information that we will need to know to go there, and also to collect science data so that way we can build more capable spacecraft to actually land upon the moon. So here we go. Let's first equip our vessel with scientific instruments. So we know that we'll be able to collect science from both near the moon and far away from it when we're far over it at high altitude, and when we're low over it at low altitude. So we're gonna outfit it with 2 sets of experiments here, where we have a mystery goo canister and a materials bay for high up, and another pair for close in to the moon. And then, of course, we need a fuel tank. We're gonna go with a relatively large vessel here, but that's okay. And then, of course, we'll just actually use a little LTV 909. This is just going to maneuver on orbit. And, you know, we actually do have Mech Jeb now. So, you know, we can use Mech Jeb to just tell us delta V stats. So this thing has a lot of delta V. It has 3.5 kilometers per second delta V in vacuum. So what if we use a smaller fuel tank, you know? So less weight, it'll be easier to get up there into orbit. And we can bring that up again. This one has almost 2,300 meters per second delta V in a vacuum, which is fine by me. That is more than enough to do everything that we need to do while we're playing around with the moon, since we're not going to be landing or anything at all. This is actually even more delta V than we really need, but that's going to be okay. So we need, of course, to now launch this thing, and we will use a similar rocket, I think, to what we used to launch the spy satellite, because that worked very well, and we saw that we actually had a lot of spare delta V launching that, and therefore it should work just fine if we use a very similar design to launch this particular mission. But yeah, we are going to be collecting science from around the moon, so essentially what that means is we're going to be doing EVA reports over all the various biomes. If you don't know, you can bring up the biome map where you can see exactly what biome you're flying over by pressing Alt F12, and that brings up the debug menu, and then brings up a couple of options, one of which is indeed to view the biomes in the map view. So that's very useful. And general stuff like that. So yeah, I'm going to be out of town for about a week, just a heads up. So do not expect a regular upload schedule for a little while. I apologize if that disappoints you. I've actually been out of town by the time you're seeing this video. In fact, the last video you saw, I was already out of town, but I am employing a little bit of scheduled uploading, but unfortunately I wasn't able to make enough videos to fully account for all the time that I will be out. But hopefully enough to satisfy you. I will be making final preparations, essentially, before I go away. As I'm recording this now, my suitcases lie behind me in states of half-packedness. I will be leaving tomorrow. Well, several days ago, by the time you were hearing this, but the point still stands. And yeah, here is our lunar orbiter. So this is a very interesting spacecraft, so we should probably call it the Spacey Moonshot. There we go, and make sure we have our staging more or less correct. Need to fix that. And you know, that is pretty good. We want to put a couple solar panels on it now, obviously, because we want to be able to actually power this thing the whole way through its flight. And that should be good. Now, it should be interesting to point out, these things, I believe they're physics-less, so it doesn't really matter if you have solar panels on, that particular solar panel on your spacecraft. I don't think it actually does anything, because they just wanted to avoid causing problems, but other solar panels and most parts actually do affect your flight. But we'll just put a little Mech Jeb unit on here, just again for the delta V stats. I'm not actually going to be using autopilot features, but I like having delta V. Now, it should be noted that this Mech Jeb is most certainly physics-less. If you look here, it says mass 0, drag 0. So it definitely is a completely physics-less part. But this should do it. This should get us into a solid lunar orbit. And let's go. So I'm going to save and launch. And you guys have seen loads of launches by this point, so I'm going to mostly cut through this part. Now, it's at this point that I realized I did goof this up a little bit. There's no fuel crossfeed in place here, so all three of these tanks are going to run out of fuel at the same time, meaning this launch vehicle is actually less efficient than it really should be. But, you know, that is going to be okay. We should still be more than making it to the moon with this design. Now, to this point, I have the brilliant idea of, what if I transfer the fuel manually? So that's what I do. I transfer the fuel manually to the main tanks here, and it will hopefully provide me with a bit more. Yeah, it provides me with a little bit of extra Delta V. So I go ahead, ditch those, and off I go. And as you can see, that actually did gain me quite a bit of extra Delta V, about an extra 700 meters per second by manually transferring it. Which it seems to imply that apparently decouplers and struts apparently have fuel crossfeed capability. It's just that they don't automatically do that. So yeah, interesting note there. But whatever, it's a video game, right? We don't expect the utmost levels of realism, nor should we. So we go ahead and we circularize our orbit, which will just take another second here. We want to get our periaps above 70,000 kilometers, because obviously below that and we'd still be inside the atmosphere, which would be unfortunate. And there we go. We are now on a relatively solid, more or less circular equatorial orbit. Now, how do we get to the moon, though? We could just burn straight towards it, but you would miss it because, of course, when you're talking about traveling through space, it takes a long time to get pretty much anywhere. So instead you have to be aiming not where it is, but where it's going to be. So what you will want to be doing is, basically, if you're in an orbit around Kerbin that's, relatively normal, relatively low, like anywhere from, 250 kilometers to 100 kilometers, what you want to be doing is setting up a maneuver node and then aiming about 90 degrees around the orbit of the moon. That's about how long it's. By the time that you travel all the way out to the moon will have gone about a quarter of the way around its orbit. So you want to be aiming about a quarter of the way ahead of it in order to get there. And as you can see, we do have a solid moon encounter, which I want to get a bit lower. I want the periaps to be relatively low. Now, it should be pointed out that if I was worried about Delta V here, they're about 50... Oh, wait, now it's too low. It's actually disappeared till we would hit the moon. If I was worried about Delta V, or if I was... What was I going to say? I'm totally lost now. Oh, right. If I was worried about not having enough Delta V to get back, I could actually plot this orbit in such a way where once I interacted with the moon's gravity, it would send me shooting back towards Kerbin, and that's called a free return trip. I'm not going to do that because I don't think it's necessary on this particular spaceflight. I'm pretty confident this rocket's going to work, but just a little note to everyone. You can, if you are careful, calculate a maneuver where you will get a free return trip back to Kerbin even if you don't burn your engines at all. Which is a real thing that real missions that were supposed to orbit the moon did, is they would calculate their orbits in such a way that if they ended up, essentially if their boosters broke for whatever reason and they could no longer make the burn to return to Earth, they would just do so anyway, naturally, by interacting with the moon's gravity. And this is, of course, extremely useful if you are flying out and you suddenly realize that your boosters are not working halfway through. Obviously a bit of a panicky situation, but at least you aren't going to drift through space forever. You know that you will, in a couple days, be recaptured by Earth and fall to the surface. which is at least much more desirable than floating around in space forever, because you'll be able to activate your parachutes and all that good stuff and continue living. You know, which is a thing that most people prefer to do. Alright, so there we go. We want to get a relatively low periaps, and here's why, so we're going to cut that out. Yeah, we want this to hit the moon. That might sound a little odd, but here's why we are hitting the moon intentionally right now. We're going to get into lunar orbit, and then we're going to jettison from this booster stage here, so we're just going to have the maneuver stage. And basically, that booster stage will then go on to hit the moon's surface, which means, again, we won't be cluttering space up with debris. Again, we are trying to not invoke Kessler syndrome. So if anyone's seen the movie Gravity, we are wanting to avoid that happening. Now, obviously, Gravity had some things in it that were physically impossible, but, you know, the principle is still there, and we certainly do not want to... Well, we just would rather not be worried when we're launching satellites that we might end up, you know, killing ourselves. Alright, so there we go. We're going to burn prograde to bring our apoaps up. And there we go. We now have a fairly... We want to raise it a little bit higher because we don't want to be flying over like a lunar mountain range and consequently be killed. But let's go ahead, now that we're high above the moon's surface. We're going to go ahead, we're going to observe the mystery goo. And we're going to observe the materials bay. And we see that these are basically the same readouts we get for being in... Excuse me, for being in space high over Kerbin. So nothing too special here. Once we get closer to it, though, we'll have some more fun times. We'll do a crew report. Ah, here we go. You look down at the cold, gray surface. It looks really beat up with craters. Fascinating information. I'm sure we wouldn't have been able to tell that from far away. We'll do an EVA report, and we've recorded our observations about the situation. We did bring Jebediah along this time. I did not change him out. You know, Jebediah, he should be the first Kerbal to visit the moon, I think. Maybe not the first Kerbal to walk on the moon, but he's the most experienced pilot that we have, so undertaking a mission like this, where we don't know anything about where we're flying, he was the one who was willing to go. He is a hero of the Kerbin people. He is a bold man, and he has the right stuff, most importantly. So we decided to send him on this untried mission. Yes, I keep unintentionally and sometimes intentionally quoting that JFK speech. It is a very wonderful speech, in my opinion. You know, we had just the whole nature of that. You know, the undertaking of going to the moon was rather spectacular. Everything that had to be done, all of the challenges that we overcame, and just the majesty of going to this body that hangs in the night sky high above us. You know, there was something magical about that and what we accomplished there, and really it's kind of a shame we haven't been back or haven't gone to Mars or any of those other places. I'm greatly looking forward to the fact that within our lifetimes, well, presumably our lifetimes if you're about my age roughly, even if you're a couple decades older than I am, you know, we will more than likely be alive to see the first humans walk upon the surface of Mars, and that will be an exciting day indeed. In my opinion, I would love to see that happen. But yeah, we are very close to the moon now, so we can go ahead and get down there, and look at that, there it is, Jebediah Kerman, now the closest Kerbal to have ever come to the moon. Yes, and again, really beat up with craters. Thank you, Jebediah, it's fascinating information. Alright, again, same, there is a mod that gives you different reports while in different biomes that are slightly wittier. Maybe I'll have to have to do that particular thing because, you know, that would make things a lot more interesting. So we're going to do that. We can see our biomes in the map now. And here we go. So we see we're going to be flying over a couple biomes here, and then of course we have more than enough Delta V on the spacecraft that we shall be able to change our orbit a little bit to grab as many biomes as we possibly can. And we're going to go ahead and turn our headlights on because it is getting a little bit dark. Alright, so there we go. We're more or less ready to be making our return trip now to go home to Kerbin. We probably could get some data from the poles, but, you know, just to be safe, we will be avoiding any undue risks to our Kerbins, because, you know, we're still fairly novice at this whole exploring the solar system thing. You know, our people have not had much experience with this first lunar flight. We don't want to risk any more than we have to, so we're going to go ahead. We're going to come around to the right side of the moon to be oriented for a proper return trip, more or less. And then we're going to fire prograde to escape from the moon's gravity well and return to Kerbin. So I'm going to go ahead and use the SAS to automatically point us prograde. And away we go. So yeah, interesting note, you really should be, as much as possible, trying to collect as many EVA reports as you can from above the different biomes. You know, people remember do experiments as much as they can, but people often seem to forget that, you know, it's quite important to be actually collecting EVAs over all the biomes. Each of those biomes is worth 24 science. So, you know, collecting 4 biomes, and you're already up to basically 100 science points. So, kind of a big deal, you know, just a little bit. But yeah, just a heads up, something you should be getting yourself into the habit of doing. So we're going to go ahead and adjust our periaps to be down inside the atmosphere to such an extent that we will be recaptured about 35 kilometers. Will more than do it. We're going to go ahead and turn off our SAS system, and, you know, we've already collected all the experiments from our mystery goo units and the materials bay, and here we are. We're headed home, and we are already within the atmosphere. We'll be landing. Here's a desert peninsula type thing. Hard to say exactly where we'll be landing, but oh well. We're going to go ahead and ditch away from our faithful booster. We're going to keep ourselves pointed retrograde, more or less. The atmosphere is eventually going to catch us and point us in the right direction. Our heat shield should point more or less into the atmosphere. Not that it matters, because once again, this the whole idea of burning up in reentry in Kerbal Space Program doesn't matter. It will affect nothing. And where is the Kerbal Space Center? Oh, we're going to land pretty close to it, actually. We are probably going to land on this side of the continent. The Kerbal Space Center is right there. So not bad. We're probably right off the other coast. You know, this would be the equivalent of launching from Cape Canaveral, going to the moon, and then coming back and landing in the Pacific Ocean, you know, off the west coast of, like, California or something like that. So not a horrible flight, all in all. So yeah, I hope you guys like the military contract. Actually, you know what? At the velocity that we were heading... Oh, wow. Are we gonna... We might re-escape. Wow. At 35 kilometers, too. I was really expecting that to capture us in one pass, but, you know, we are coming back up out of the... We're coming back up out of the atmosphere again now. Now, we are losing a lot of our velocity, it should be noted. And our apoaps is dropping. It has dropped significantly. Remember, it was highly elliptical all the way up to there, but definitely a lot lower now. So yes, we are almost through with this flight here. And yeah, I guess I'll be back in a moment. Alright, so here we are. We actually are re-entering this time on the second time around the planet. We managed to kill off enough velocity with that first pass through the atmosphere that the second pass will indeed bring us all the way down for a slightly less perfect landing this time. But at least this time it is a landing. And we're going to assume that if somebody were coming back from the moon, that all the nations would be more than welcoming to the hero who went all the way further than any Kerbal has ever gone before. This was a monumental achievement for the Kerbal people as a whole. So I don't think whatever country we're landing in, they probably won't mind as to the fact that we're landing here uninvited, so to speak. So yeah, that was our first orbit around the moon. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm sorry this episode not quite as good as I would normally like, but I wanted to have something at least. And to be honest, at this point, in my opinion, I guess I just missed an opportunity to get surface samples from Kerbal's deserts, but whatever. In my opinion, there's just nothing that thrilling about orbiting the moon anymore. As you can see, we did get 472 freaking science for that, which is awesome. And that will be put to use in future episodes, to be sure. But yeah, the next episode, which will be recorded in quite a while, not until after I get back, that will be much more information, and my cat just totally scared the crap out of me by jumping up on the desk in front of me. So yeah, with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and I hope that all of you have a nice day. Thanks for watching.